I'm proud to be one of the greenest mayors in Michigan as the mayor of Lansing. I signed the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement on behalf of my city. I created the first ever Go Green coordinator position for the city to help us to go green. And we have an RPS in the city. We had it ahead of the state. I'm proud of that. And that we will have an RPS, a renewable portfolio standard. Our goal is to have 20% renewable by 2020. We did that ahead of the state of Michigan. Lansing was the first city in the nation to take the EPA Energy Star Challenge, pledging to reduce our overall energy use in the city by 10%, reducing our carbon emissions and also saving money for our taxpayers. We're one of a few cities who qualified to promote and certify green schools within our city. So that we're promoting conservation efforts and renewables in our school system. And our Board of Water and Light, our city public utility, was the first public utility to adopt a renewable portfolio standard. We did all this because it's the right thing to do, and by the way, it saves money. It's the right thing to do morally, environmentally, and it's the right thing financially. And I hope to continue that kind of leadership as governor of the state of Michigan.
I'm honored. I've been an active environmentalist for many years. I spent 6 years, 2 terms, on the Michigan chapter of the Nature Conservancy as a trustee. I'm here today because Michigan's an economic disaster. We have a fundamental lack of leadership in Lansing, and career politicians are not the answer. In my view, it's time for real-world common-sense solutions to come to the table. We need a vision, plan, and action in the state to reinvent our state. And due to time, I'm going to only talk about the vision tonight. I have a vision for Michigan. It's about a new era, the era of innovation. It's based on a globally diverse, competitive economy, enhancing and protecting our natural resources, restoring our central cities, and keeping our young people here. And one of the key things we need to do is get a better understanding of the interaction between the environment and the economy. To have a thriving economy, we need to have a sustainable environment. It's key to quality of life. It's the future of what talent will be seeking and success. From the environmental point of view, the best way to have a sustainable environment is to have a thriving economy, because then you have the resources to reinvest, to do the protection, to do the enhancement. We need to look at these things. And we need to look at the long term, just not the short term. We need to think about the present and the future. And let me close with a quote from Governor Milliken. It is not only our privilege to it's not only our privilege to preserve and protect our environment, it is our sovereign duty. Thank you.
Candidates, the first question will come from Ron Swankowski.
Thank you, and I want to also thank you 3 gentlemen for taking the time out of, I know, your busy schedules to come here and address these important issues tonight. I certainly hope the remaining men running for governor think these issues are important enough to discuss in the weeks and months to come. And I also want to thank the many folks who submitted questions for this forum tonight, many of which were formulated into the questions that we'll be asking the candidates this evening. Here's the first one, and it's a broad-based question. One of the great struggles facing Michigan, if you look at things like shoreline windmills, Upper Peninsula mining, any number of issues, is the tension between economic development and environmental protection. We all know that it is possible to have both, but often it can take a lot of getting there to bring the 2 sides together in a way that is beneficial or at least acceptable to both. What experience do you have in bringing disparate and sometimes downright hostile interests together and leading them to common ground? Can you offer an example of when you faced such a situation, and what did you do about it?
Mr. Bernero, you have the first answer. 1 minute.
Well, of course, I have to deal with the city council on a regular basis. So, you know, being at the ground level, seriously, as a mayor of a city, we deal with every issue that affects people's day-to-day life. We have a recycling program in the city that we're very proud of. But every issue, whether it's 911 calls that need to be answered immediately in life or death situations, or just filling potholes or picking up garbage, this is what we do in local government, and we do it well, and we face every type of issue at that level. You know, one of the things, having some legislative experience, I worked with Tom George, Senator George in the legislature. We passed a bill called Kevin's Law that brought together some different groups. Some people thought that you shouldn't provide any type of treatment of restraints when people need it, even with severe mental illness. We were able to deal with all sides and get that bill passed by working Democrat and Republican together.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Snyder. 1 minute.
Ann Arbor Spark is my illustration. I'm a private citizen in Ann Arbor. I had no position or authority. I was part of a team that said we need to do economic development in our community. And if you know the Ann Arbor community, you have 2 universities in our area, multiple cities, private sector, lots of jurisdictions, lots of differences where typically people didn't work well together. Well, we created an economic development organization called Ann Arbor Spark. I wrote the business plan. I was the founding chair. People wondered, even after we created it, did it have value? A couple years after we started Spark, Pfizer shut down and we lost 2,000 jobs in our community. Because Ann Arbor Spark existed, we were able to keep over 800 people and their families working in our area. And now it's one of the leading economic development organizations in the country. That's how you get people to work together, is using common sense, laying out facts, and working together.
Thank you. Vincent, the next question is yours.
Well, gentlemen, let me be the last person during the forum to also thank you for participating this evening and thanking the Michigan League of Conservation Voters for holding the forum tonight. The first question I have for you, what are your thoughts about increasing passenger rail service in Michigan, including both high-speed rail service and a proposed Detroit to Ann Arbor commuter rail project?
Rail service long-term is important. It's important to the restoration of our central cities. It's important from an environmental point of view. We need to work hard on that. The Ann Arbor to Detroit illustration is a good one. There are challenges, so we do need to be fiscally prudent. We need to look at the long-term return on investment, though, and say, are there opportunities to finance things involving the private sector and involving things? One of the illustrations I like to cite to people is the Woodward Corridor example, where the private sector wants to take the lead on the project, and the best role for government isn't to put out dollars. It's actually to look at our regulatory system, our permitting system. How do we facilitate that and make it easy for people to do things and let the private sector work? That's the starting point for these opportunities. And then let's look at the long-term analysis, because mass transit, if you want those vibrant cities and you want to keep our young people here, that is an important aspect that we do need to look at over the longer term.
Mr. Bernero.
Oh, I think Vince has really hit on something. The studies show that young people today, when they locate to a college or when they are looking to go to a city after they graduate, they want to go to a city where they don't have to own a car. It's very different from when we grew up and we couldn't wait to get a car. Young people today want that public transportation. So it's certainly good for the environment. It's good for economic development. It's where we must go. I, too, commend the Woodward Avenue project, which shows public-private working together. That's important. But, you know, I think it also demonstrates the fact that Tom says there isn't money for it. You know, it's just a shame that the stimulus dollars that were really intended for transformational projects like this really had to go to just fill budget holes. The legislature really squandered that opportunity to make transformative decisions and investments in our communities that could really have taken a big leap forward, really, environmentally and politically. But because we have a broken financial system, a bankrupt system at the state capitol, we weren't able to really take advantage of the stimulus.
Thank you. Next question, Ron.
It seems pretty obvious that when we talk about mass transit, which is an example of doing more with less, if we had better mass transit in this state, that's not going to happen in Michigan without some big-time assistance from the federal government. And yet Michigan, historically, has always been a donor state. We never have gotten back dollar for dollar all the tax money that this state sends to Washington. Even now, when we have the highest unemployment rate in the United States, we don't get back dollar for dollar. What are you, as governor, going to do about increasing Michigan's return of its tax dollars from Washington?
Mr. Snyder.
Well, there's a whole series of things in addition to transportation, because we get back only about 92 cents on the dollar. So we are a donor state, which is incredible if you think we're the 50th state in unemployment. So we do need to resolve that. Part of that's getting our congressional delegation to finally work together better. We have a very divided delegation. It's about your governor going there and speaking up and taking the mayor with them, Mayor Bing, and other people making our statements and putting our case on the table to get people to understand this is our time of need. Let's at least get our dollar back. But beyond that, there are other issues. I wouldn't stop at transportation, as I said. Think about the Great Lakes. That's really a case where, as a governor, we need to do better at bringing governors together and doing systemic work on treating the Great Lakes as one whole system and succeeding there, and leveraging things like a great legislative caucus that people like Senator Burkholz helped put together. There are many opportunities working with the federal government where we simply haven't gotten our facts together and stated our case well enough.
Mr. Bernero.
Well, Rick has a good point that it would be good to work with other Great Lakes governors. You know, as mayor, I started the Mayor's Automotive Coalition to go to Washington and advocate for automotive-related communities because there was no such organization. We belonged to a regular mayor's group, but they weren't doing the job. And so I got mayors together from all over the state and country, the mayor of Shreveport, the mayor of Arlington, Democrats and Republicans, and we went to Washington and advocated for greater assistance for cities that had an automotive background, and we got results. So absolutely, that's crucial. The other thing is don't leave money on the table. You know, we've got to make the match. When you can get $3 or $4 for every one, you've got to make that match. And they don't have their priorities together at the state capitol. With all due respect, I don't mean that as a slam on Tom here, but with all due respect, they do not have their priorities together. They're not getting the basics done. They're not getting their budgets done. They've had 2 government shutdowns. The system is broken over there at the state capitol. I see it from my office as mayor.
That's your question.
Thank you. Well, as I said, Michigan is one of 2 states that manages its own wetland protection program, but as the 3 of you have indicated tonight, there's not a lot of money in the state budget to pay for many things, and so the governor's budget now would give that government control back to the federal government. I'm wondering if any of you believe there are areas where Michigan needs to be more aggressive in environmental protection than the federal government, even if it costs more money for the state.
Mr. Bernero?
Well, there's no doubt that the Pure Michigan campaign, which is a wonderful campaign, it evokes wonderful images and memories for most of us in growing up in Michigan. That needs to be more than a slogan, and I'm absolutely committed to that. So I want to be clear, while I think probably all 3 of us would agree that we have to be very careful with taxpayer money, and I've certainly demonstrated that as mayor of Lansing, not raising taxes in 5 years and cutting a lot out of the budget, and still getting the vital work done. Part of the vital work, a key part of the vital work, and one of the reasons I'm here tonight is because the environment is linked to our health in every way, our economic health, our environmental health, morally, you name it. So if we need more money to do it right, I wouldn't be afraid to put the money, to make it a priority out of the budget. And I don't agree with giving the wetlands back to the feds. I think we should do that. There are things that we're going to nurture in Michigan like nobody else, and we need to be prepared to protect it.
Mr. Snyder?
2 illustrations that I would say. Well, first I would say in the case of the federal government, sometimes I don't think they know what they're doing. So there's a starting point there that we need to carefully watch and monitor. And again, that goes back to the earlier question about speaking up. But 2 areas in particular that the federal government has not done well enough on. One is the Great Lakes again, the Asian carp situation. That's been not just 2009 issue, 2010 issue. That was going back a decade. 2002. The Great Lakes Fishery Commission was talking about the things that needed to be done with the Asian carp, and it didn't happen. We do need to work on the Great Lakes with the other states. The second thing I would say, the federal government is doing many different things. If you look down in Louisiana, I don't believe we should be drilling under the Great Lakes, and we need to make that loud and clear to people.
Thank you. Next question.
Here's an economic and transportation issue. Canada has offered to front, in effect, the state of Michigan $550 million as its share, the state's share, of building a second bridge over the Detroit River, connecting Detroit to Windsor. The owner, meanwhile, of the private Ambassador Bridge wants to build a second span near his bridge at his own expense. What's your position on whether the state should take Canada's money and start building a second bridge downstream from the Ambassador?
Mr. Snyder?
Well, the first question in my book is to say how much demand is there for the bridge, because that's changed dramatically. What is the need? And I'm not sure that's been adequately answered. Beyond that, you start looking at the questions that it's a balancing act. On clear hand, if the private sector is willing to do it, that's the general default setting I would look at. If private monies can do it, and again, it doesn't become a monopoly position taking advantage of people, we should let free enterprise work. With respect to the government span, it's great, Canada's a great partner, so they need to be part of this discussion, but we also have to ask the question, quite often in these construction projects, that first budget you see, how many times have we ever hit the first budget? And secondly, how are we going to pay for this thing longer term? If it's something where a private party can come operate it and they're willing to work on the tolls, that might work, but if it's something where the liability comes back on the state for the next 30 years, 50 years, that's a serious reservation I would have to say, we're in a tough spot today, let's not dig a deeper hole for our kids.
Mr. Bernero.
My mother said, beware of friends bearing gifts. She said it in Italian. It sounded better. But so I think the Canadians would want something for that. And I do believe that a second span is necessary, another span now. You build for the next 50 years, not the next 5 months. The economy may not call for it now, but I have confidence that with new leadership, we will get this economy turned around, and we will need that span. But I agree that if it's there in the private sector, if there's somebody that's willing to put up their money and take that risk, why would the state step in to take that risk?
Next question.
Well, Mr. Bernero has indicated that he would oppose drilling in the Great Lakes. I wonder what the three of you think about putting windmills or wind turbines in the Great Lakes. And so my question is, as governor, would you support or oppose the development of wind turbines in the Great Lakes for energy production? And what restrictions or limitations, if any, would you place on offshore wind farms?
Well, I'll tell you, the devastation that continues as we speak off the Gulf is enough to make any of us pause and I think really consider this issue. Would I rather have a windmill, an offshore wind turbine, than something much worse? Of course I would. So, you know, I'm open to it. I agree the scenic beauty of Michigan is important, but the environmental quality and the environmental protection of our lakes and green energy is also important. So this is something we have to have a dialogue about. I would work with groups like the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. I would work with citizen groups to try to get as many wind turbines up as we can to boost you know, that RPS we talk about. That has practical implications. This is one of those practical implications. We need a lot of wind turbines in areas where there's high wind if we're going to get that clean energy, folks. You know, if we're going to reduce our need, our dependency on that oil, we need those wind turbines. So this is a dialogue we need to have, and I would be pushing to build them.
Mr. Snyder.
Yeah, and the offshore question, if you look at where we're at, we need to look at all our renewable options where it makes sense. And this is a case where you have to balance economics with tourism, with property rights, and the environmental considerations. And I'm proud to say I believe people are already working this issue pretty hard. There's an offshore wind council that's been trying to develop the right procedures for doing this. It's broad-based, it's very inclusive. I actually read an article recently in the Michigan Environmental Council newsletter talking about the good things that's going on with this council. So if this is a case where you can take all those constituencies and they come up with a fine set of rules that they believe is appropriate, the governor should look hard at that and say, this could be a very good idea. Now let's follow those mechanisms. Part of it is a very emotional issue. In some ways, the people that are proposing stuff already could be part of the problem, because instead of letting this council do their work and come out with a good set of rules to see if it is appropriate, they're creating lightning rod issues that could actually divert us from another opportunity to be more efficient in our state.
Next question.
And let me just say, gentlemen, that I think as long as we have political campaigns, there will be no shortage of wind in Michigan. But let's stay on that subject of alternative energy. And the governor, as I'm sure you know, Governor Granholm, has been a big booster of wind power. Not only that, but alternative energy sources. Are you convinced that alternative energy, wind power, solar power, etc., these alternative energy sources can truly become a mainstay of the next Michigan economy? Is it a real deal to you?
Mr. Bernero, your answer.
I am convinced that it's a real deal, absolutely. And again, it's like, in a sense, talking about the bridge traffic and saying, well, we don't need a bridge because the economy is down now. Part of this is faith in the future. I mean, part of it is we've always been a society that believes in technology, not to solve all of our problems, but certainly to make it better. And the technology has advanced greatly already with solar panels and wind turbines, and I believe that it will continue, that there is great room for improvement. The battery technology that Tom was talking about, that's gotten a lot better already, just in a period of 5 years. It's leapfrogging. And so I think we have to continue to make investments. We have to, and we've taken a methodical approach to it. We've got to push the envelope a little bit. You know, some of this necessity is the mother of invention. We have necessity. Look at the Gulf, if you want to know, if there's any question. We have the necessity. We want the power. We like our lights. We like the warm houses. So we've got to push the envelope. You know, it wasn't easy to put a man on the moon. It was hard. This will be hard, but it can be done.
That's your time, sir. Mr. Snyder.
It's a hype versus substance story. There's a lot of hype about all this, and I think it's being overhyped in many respects by the governor. She's been picking winners and losers and overdoing incentives far too much in this state versus fixing our tax system, our regulatory system, and having a better environment for free enterprise to work. But there is real substance to alternative energy. It is something that's going to be part of our portfolio for success for the long term. We have a strong manufacturing base we should not walk away from. We can leverage that to a positive. So there are outstanding opportunities there in terms of the longer term, but it is going to take some time to develop. It should be part of a portfolio of diversifying all of Michigan's economy, and it is important.
Next question.
We have a lot of laws in Michigan and federal laws that are designed to protect the environment. Even with those laws, low-income and minority communities often bear a disproportionate burden from the pollution and environmental hazards that still exist. The federal agencies, when they make rules, are mandated to take that into consideration, that disproportionate environmental impact, when they make their plans and decisions. But Michigan doesn't have a rule like that. I wonder if you believe that environmental justice should be a component of Michigan's decision-making process when it comes to development and other programs.
Yeah, in terms of looking at, for any regulation in the state, we need to look at several things. We need to look at the economics. We do not do a good job of that today, to say what is the cost on our economy. We do need to be sensitive to the needs of low-income people and understand that. And that's part of the reason I have the restoration of central cities so central in my focus. Because the key thing we need to do to help those people is get them a job, to be blunt. We're in an environment now where there's far too much unemployment. If you really want to help people, that's part of making our economy very competitive. That's tax, regulatory, our whole government structure, and give them an opportunity to succeed. Our unemployment in cities like Detroit, they say it's 30%. It's probably closer to 50% plus. And if we can help these people get a job, then we've gotten them real opportunity and we've got them on a path to success. And if we create our central cities, again, looking at the regulatory costs, that's where our young people want to go. There's a great path to the future there if we can work together on working on the cities.
Mr. Bernero.
Environmental injustice in our urban areas is a real issue. Deterioration of our urban community has had an impact on our people, and it should be addressed. Investment in energy efficiency will help this area because a lot of the efficiency that we can have is in urban areas. And those shower heads that that my friend Tom, kind of poked fun at, let's not poke too much fun at energy efficiency because that's one of the most efficient, one of the best investments we can make. When we talk about alternative energy and new sources of energy, we can create a lot of energy by getting more efficiency out of what we're using. That's one of the cheapest things we can do. And to his credit, President Obama has pushed and pushed and pushed us to take energy efficiency seriously. That's a way to be better stewards, to use the energy, and to help reduce costs. At the same time that you're reducing the output, the carbon output, you're helping to save money for people who could sure use it. So, and as we move toward more renewables, this also will address the environmental deterioration of our urban centers.
Nestle withdraws Michigan water from Osceola County, maybe 45 miles west and a little north of here, bottles it under its Ice Mountain brand. They take out something like 400 gallons a minute. Regarding Michigan's inland waters, which are not necessarily subject to the Great Lakes Compact or other controls, would you, as governor, entertain other large-scale bottled water operations in Michigan, and what would you need to know before you approved one? Bottled water operations in Michigan. More of them, less of them.
Mr. Snyder.
It's a balancing act again, because again, we need to grow our economy. So to the extent people can do business here and we have something we can export and do it appropriately, we need to look at those opportunities and we should let free enterprise work. The real question when you have a discussion with people like that is how are they handling the situation? Because in many cases when you have a facility like that, if they want to get involved in the community, and this is happening around the country, there are other things they can agree to do to help work with groundwater restoration and recharging. There are ways that if they help develop programs to work with agricultural providers, farmers on that watershed, there are ways to effectively, essentially almost offset in some cases what they're withdrawing with better agricultural practices and different things we can do somewhere on that watershed system. And that's one of the great advances that we're not really using today is to figure out how to use environmental services the right way in terms of understanding those needs. But some of these companies are very thoughtful and know how to do it right. We shouldn't discourage them. We should work with them.
That's your time. Thank you. Mr. Bernero.
One of the first things I would do as governor would be to appoint a panel of experts to look at all of the issues that are facing us with our Great Lakes. This is one of the most important issues that we face that distinguishes this state of Michigan. If you think about how we all hold up our hands to describe our state, we are defined literally by the Great Lakes, and the quality of the Great Lakes matters, and all of our inland lakes matter to our quality of life. And so we need to get a handle on this. I'm very concerned. This is one of our leading resources. People are coming for our water. It's one of the things that makes us so great, but it's also one I think that will make us a target. So we need to get the best minds. Some of them are here tonight. I see the mayor of Grand Rapids is here. He's been a leader on protecting our lakes and our water resources. We need to get those experts together and develop very clear rules. I am suspicious about anybody trying to take our water.
Next question.
Not only do lots of tourists come to Michigan to appreciate and enjoy the Great Lakes, we're told now that the Asian carp are on their way to enjoy the Great Lakes as well. What should Michigan's next step be in trying to protect the Great Lakes from the Asian carp? And what are some long-term solutions that can be done overall to protect the Great Lakes from invasive species?
Mr. Bernero?
Well, we need to move and form that. We talked about working with other governors, with other mayors. We need to get together to apply all the pressure possible to get those locks closed in Chicago and take any other steps necessary to protect our beautiful Great Lakes and the over $7 billion fishing industry that it represents. The livelihood of thousands of people relies on that. The future of our state relies on it. And I have to say this is something that I have to praise a little bit the efforts of the Attorney General. This is something that Mike Cox has at least taken a strong position on. The governor has led strongly on. And this is something that I think we can agree as Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever. If you're a Michigander, if you love this state and what we're about, then we've got to be united and use every resource possible. It's got to be a top priority to stop those invasive species from reaching our lakes.
Mr. Snyder?
With respect to the Asian carp, the answer is permanent separation of those bodies to keep the Asian carp out. That's what we need to have happen. And it should have happened a long time ago. That's what bothers me the most. You can go back to a summit in 2002. I believe it was in Chicago. Mayor Daley was there. And they talked about the issues and the needs of the Asian carp and talked about the need to separate. We failed to do that. That just reinforces the need for the Great Lakes governors to work much better together. Again, there's already a caucus of legislators from the Great Lakes states working together thanks to Senator Burkholz. There's great opportunity there. The other issue is we need to use the Asian carp as a poster child because it's not ending there. There's actually been over 180 different kinds of invasive species already in the Great Lakes. They're coming at the rate of about 2 a year. So what we need to learn from this is we need to have the right mechanisms: prevention, detection, rapid response, and management if we need to. But let's get a program in place so we're not responding to a crisis. We're being proactive in getting ahead of this situation because it's not going to go away.
Thank you. Next question.
Michigan will have a standard in place in 2015 that will require utility companies to get 10% of their energy from renewable sources by 2015. There is a proposal, I believe it's from the House Democratic Caucus, that would make this standard 30% by 2025. And the thinking being, if we had such a high standard, of course, Michigan would then be a very attractive place for the alternative energy industry that we've already discussed. So do you think that the 10% standard for renewables is adequate for the foreseeable future, or would you be willing to go as high as 30%, requiring utilities to get 30% of their energy from renewable sources?
There is a balancing act there. I mean, a lot of hard work went into the renewable standards we have, that legislation. They're making progress on achieving it. Before we change that number, we need to go back and reevaluate to say what progress have we made, at what cost, and then move ahead to say what could that next standard be. Because it's a balancing act of saying it's great to have more renewables, to get down our reliance, to help our environment, our economy, all those wonderful things. At the same time, what is that additional cost to the consumer? And how do we manage that so we are not putting on undue burden, because we do need to be competitive. We are not a competitive state right now because of the cost of our government, our tax system, our regulatory system. We can adjust those things, but we also need to include utility costs. One other thing that wasn't mentioned in the question that we actually need to promote more is the energy efficiency part of this. The best way for us to all win is not to do new things, it's actually to use energy efficiency, because that's a win-win already out of the gate, and we need to talk more about how we can be more efficient.
Mr. Bernero.
We need to give this RPS time to work, and we need to focus on green manufacturing in this state. What killed the jobs wasn't the establishment of the RPS, Tom. What killed the jobs was Wall Street giving up on Michigan and shipping all of our jobs overseas to places like Mexico and China. But we have an opportunity to put the P back in GDP, the gross domestic product. We have an opportunity to help diversify our economy. To many of these people that have lost their jobs in automotive could now turn into making wind turbines and solar panels and the battery technology. We've made some strides in this area in Michigan, and we can do much more. I've talked to manufacturers who would like to convert their plants, who would like to do more green manufacturing. That's what we need to focus on growing those jobs here rather than losing them to another state or another country. We can do it in Michigan. We make things.
Next question.
A number of mining companies have expressed an interest in following Kennecott Mining Corporation's plan to mine in the Upper Peninsula. As governor, would you support expanded mining in the Upper Peninsula or not, and why?
Mr. Snyder?
Well, I'd leave that to the market to work in many respects, because what we already have done in the state from a government point of view is we established the toughest standards in the nation for mining. And that was done much like the offshore wind concept. That was done with a broad base of constituencies that included environmental groups, the business community, all different communities. And we put in a standard as tough as there is. Now that we put in that standard, we should agree to abide by that. If people are going to live up to that standard and want to mine, which is part of our culture in this state. Up in the UP, many people trace their heritage back to mining communities and mining families. They should be able to mine, but again, we need to make sure they're following through and complying with those regulations and doing it the right way. We've set the rules, we had broad agreement, let's follow through and let free enterprise work and let miners go do mining. Because if you think about where else would that happen in the world, it would happen someplace where there are hardly any environmental controls at all.
Mr.
So let's
Snyder,
do it the
that's
right
your
way.
time. Thank you. Mr. Bernero?
Well, I don't disagree with Rick on this. I'm willing to support it as long as there is proper environmental protection standards, and which we are enforcing. And that's again why I think it's important that we not give up enforcement, and why it's important that we properly fund the department. And we haven't gotten to that question yet. What is the department? Natural Resources, Environmental Protection. It's very important that we properly fund these so that we can make sure that it's done properly and that we respect the pure Michigan that we all love. I think it can be done. I think you can have the jobs and the environment. I don't think you have to pick one or the other. And this is an example of some much needed jobs up in the Upper Peninsula. People need to work, and as long as it's done environmentally responsibly, I think it's fine.
Last week, the state of Michigan took in $178 million, a record amount apparently, auctioning off the rights to drill for some new natural gas that apparently has been found deep under the northern lower peninsula. What safeguards would you like to see in place for this expanded oil and natural gas drilling in northern lower Michigan? And can you foresee any circumstances under which the money, given the state's budget situation, the money should be tapped for something other than to buy public lands? So safeguards for expanded drilling, and what should we do with all that money? And I know it's constitutionally protected, but can you foresee the circumstance where we might need to tap it?
Mr. Bernero?
Let me answer the second part first. Absolutely no diversion of the money. One of the things that is outrageous about this legislature is their use of funds, earmarked funds that they're using for other purposes. When voters put money in a certain pot, that's what it should be used for. And so the money should go to preserve and protect the land in the state of Michigan. As far as oil and gas drilling, you know, again, we've seen the results. We've got to be very careful about using techniques that we really can't answer that we can't fix when things go wrong. We see the example in the Gulf. I'm not willing to take any chances with the Michigan that I love. It is horrific what's happening even now as we speak in the Gulf of Mexico, and so I will be most cautious and enforce with great rigidity any and all rules we have on drilling. And I certainly would not allow it in our Great Lakes.
Mr. Snyder?
Well, I think it's already set in the Constitution, and I would abide by that. I think that's the way it should be. We're refilling the Natural Resources Trust Fund. We're going to have extra dollars that are going to go to the state parks and other recreational opportunities. I mean, this gets back to the point of what's going to help build Michigan back: tourism, wonderful things like that. There's great opportunity there by having wonderful parks and wonderful opportunities. We need to go with that. One thing I would say, though, is the attitude of saying we've been efficient, we have not been. I mean, our budget system is fundamentally flawed in the state. We're a bureaucracy, and it's time for bureaucracy to go. Our citizens, you deserve having us show you value for money, real outcomes and real results, not simply taking your dollars and spending them and saying, let's just cut more or let's raise revenue. Let's get efficient about government and show you real value for money.